She raised him as her own son, but then, with his own hands, he changed the locks and threw her out of the house she had poured her whole life into building. Thursday. An afternoon with neither sun nor rain. The kind of weather that makes you feel the chill most in the emptiness in your chest. Mabel Green stood before the door of the ivory-white wooden house in West Savannah, a cloth grocery bag in her hand. Inside was a loaf of bread, a few cans of beans, and a rotisserie chicken still warm through its plastic bag. She knocked 3 times. No one answered. The key in her hand no longer fit the lock. She tried turning it slowly, then quickly, then backward as if she were old enough to have forgotten her own dominant hand. But it wasn't her hand that was the problem. The lock had been changed. Then the door opened a crack, not Tyler, but Amber, his new girlfriend. She frowned, as if surprised to see her standing there.
"Weren't you supposed to be back later?"
Mabel felt her chest tighten.
"Why can't I get into my house?"
Amber glanced inside, then pulled the door partially closed. Her voice grew softer.
"Tyler said he already discussed it with you, about transferring ownership."
"Transferring what?"
"You signed the papers a few weeks ago, remember, at the dining table."
Then Amber closed the door. This time, the lock immediately turned in its slot. Mabel didn't knock again. She stood there for 5 minutes. Then 10. The chicken grew cold in her hands, like a child no one wanted to hold. Tyler hadn't just taken the house, he had taken her trust, and in a blind moment of pain, Mabel Green suddenly remembered who she used to be, because before she was the woman huddled on her own doorstep, she had been a mother, not the one who gave birth to Tyler, but the one who had opened her arms to him when no one else would bother. And now, there was one thing Tyler didn't know: Mabel was not as poor as he thought, and she still held a weapon he had never learned: patience. Mabel Green was not the kind of person made to stand out. She lived quietly in an old residential neighborhood in West Savannah, where the days were filled with the sound of sparrows, and the nights with the chirping of crickets and the wind rattling the tin roof. As a night shift nurse at Baptist Memorial Hospital, she was used to walking home before the sun was awake and eating breakfast when others were eating lunch. She was 38 that year, and had accepted the fact that she couldn't have children. 2 miscarriages, 1 failed in vitro fertilization. With each disappointment, she was just silent. No tears, no blame. She would just quietly tuck the name of a child never named between the pages of a notebook, fold it closed, and put it away in a drawer. But then, one October night, fate placed a child in her hands in a way no one expected. The boy, named Tyler, 2 years old, with pale skin, sparse blonde hair, and so thin you could see his collarbones, was brought into the emergency room with a broken left arm, bruises on his shoulder, and a face as white as paper. The woman with him, his foster mother, simply signed some papers and left, leaving behind a child who didn't cry, with no one to hold him. Tyler didn't say a word for 2 days. He would only clutch Mabel's sleeve whenever she came near. He would only eat when she fed him herself. He would only sleep when he could smell the fabric spray she used on her nurse's uniform, the faint scent of lavender and old soap. She had no intention of adopting a child, but sometimes God doesn't ask. He simply places the child in your arms and waits to see if you'll let go. 2 months later, Mabel filed for temporary foster care. 6 months later, Tyler took the last name, Green. Her friends said she was crazy. A single black woman without a big, fancy house, raising a white boy with signs of behavioral disorders. Are you trying to save the whole system? She just smiled. No, I'm just saving this one. Tyler never knew that on the first night she placed him in the small crib in her living room. She didn't sleep, not because she was afraid he would cry, but because she couldn't believe after all those empty years that there was the sound of a child's steady breathing in her house. From that day on, she gave everything she had to Tyler, not abundant, but more than enough. A red race car bed, lunches with his name written in marker, swimming lessons, piano lessons, and nightly stories until he fell asleep. Tyler had asthma. She found the best pediatrician in the region. Tyler was a poor reader. She hired a tutor. Tyler asked how to braid hair. She brought out a doll and taught him, so that one day he would know how to care for his own daughter. No one taught her how to be a mother, but when she watched Tyler playing in the dirt in the yard, covered from head to toe and giggling, she knew she had her answer. Loving a child isn't about giving them birth, it's about daring not to leave them behind. Tyler grew up between two worlds. One was the small house with the smell of baked cornbread and the sound of the evening news channel. The other was the society outside with its strange looks and unspoken questions. When he was little, Tyler didn't mind that he was different from his mother. But everything began to change when he turned 12. That evening, while setting the table, Tyler stood in front of the mirror, then turned to ask, "Mom, why don't I look like you?" "How so, sweetie?" "My skin is white, my hair is blonde. But you don't look like me." Mabel knelt down to his level and said softly, "Because I didn't give birth to you, but I chose to love you." And that's something many people who do give birth can't manage. Tyler nodded, but from that day on, he began to see things differently. At the supermarket, he noticed people looking at them, a black woman and a white child, as something out of place. At school, his friends would ask, "Were you adopted?" There was even a time when a teacher reminded Mabel not to forget to bring the valid guardianship papers, as if she weren't his real mother. Tyler started calling her Mama less in public, then Mabel when his friends came over, then silence. And though it was never spoken, Mabel understood. A crack was growing not from a lack of love, but from the world. The older he got, the more Tyler withdrew from his mother. The hugs became scarcer, the dinners quieter. The holidays were spent with friends instead of at home. When Tyler went to college in Atlanta, Mabel sent him off with a box of instant noodles, 2 prayer books, and a handwritten card, "You'll always have a home to come back to." But his visits home became fewer and fewer. Sometimes it was busy with school. Sometimes it was a group meeting. And when he did come home, it was just for one night, one meal, before rushing off again with a backpack and a constantly busy phone. Mabel didn't blame him. She kept his room exactly as it was, from the old race car bed to the drawing Tyler made in second grade hanging above it. She cooked his favorite meal every Sunday, even though she knew no one was coming. She turned on the answering machine just to hear his voice, even though all his calls were to say he'd be late. That's what loving a child is, not because they need it, but because you never stop hoping. Then, one day, Tyler called after nearly 8 months without a single text. "Mom, I want to come visit you, and I'm bringing my girlfriend." Mabel breathed a soft sigh over the phone, not out of joy, but because she had been waiting for that call for so long. She cleaned up the porch, bought a new set of dishes, baked a butter cake from the recipe Tyler had loved as a child. He came home with Amber, a girl with brown hair, sharp eyes, and a phone that never left her hand. She greeted Mabel with a faint smile, then scrolled through her phone for the entire meal. But Tyler, he talked, asked how she was, and even helped her in the garden. Mabel smiled. A little warmth she thought had gone cold flickered in her heart. But what she didn't know was, it wasn't love that brought Tyler back. It was calculation, not to reconnect, but to prepare to take away the most important thing. After that return, Tyler started visiting more often. At first, Mabel was surprised, then felt comforted. He was no longer silent as before. He even helped her clean the windows, clear the gutters, and bought more blood pressure medication when she forgot. Amber also appeared more, always polite, always seeming busy but still trying to play her part. They sat on the porch in the afternoon, eating popcorn, watching Jeopardy on TV. Mabel began to believe maybe things are really healing, until one Sunday afternoon, as the kitchen filled with the scent of baked sweet potato pie, and she was sitting and folding dish towels to the soft sound of gospel music. Tyler walked in, carrying a leather briefcase and a smile, as if this were a trivial matter. "Mom, we brought some papers over. Just some administrative stuff to make it easier to manage the house, taxes, just in case anything happens." Mabel stopped what she was doing. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of papers?" "A partial transfer of property rights. It's all got legal representation, power of attorney. You don't have to worry. We had someone check it thoroughly. Amber works at a real estate company. She knows all about this stuff." From the sofa, Amber looked up, without taking her eyes off her phone. "It's just to avoid trouble later on. Miss Mabel, you're still the owner of the house. Nothing changes." Mabel felt a heaviness in her chest. She wasn't good at reading documents. She didn't wear her glasses often anymore because they pinched the bridge of her nose and gave her headaches. Tyler took out a pen. His voice was as soft as a lullaby. "I've already marked where you need to sign. You just have to write your name. I've read the whole thing carefully. I guarantee there's nothing to worry about." She hesitated. Something inside her wanted to stop, to say, "I need time to read this." But then
She remembered the little boy from long ago who had clung to her shirt, who had called her his angel, and she thought, how could I doubt the very child I raised as my own flesh and blood? She took the pen and signed this page, then the next. In the kitchen, a timer chimed, signaling the sweet potato pie was done. The room was fragrant with cinnamon and butter, the scent of Tyler's childhood. Amber smiled, something too perfect in the curl of her lip that Mabel couldn't name. When she finished signing the last page, Tyler joked, "History has been made, Mama. This house is now a family investment property." Mabel gave a slight, uncertain smile. That day, she had no idea. She had just signed away her entire life, and had just walked into a trap set by the very child she had once called a miracle. That afternoon, the savannah sky wasn't raining, but the ground felt as cold as if someone had just thrown a whole bucket of water on Mabel's heart. She returned from the grocery store. In her bag was a soft loaf of bread, a few cans of white beans, a fresh bunch of parsley, and a fragrant rotisserie chicken she planned to make soup with for Tyler and Amber that night. The key wouldn't fit in the lock. At first, she thought she was confused. Then she turned it the other way. The third time, her hand trembled, but this time it wasn't from old age. The lock had been changed, and her trust had been changed long before that. She knocked, once, twice, then 3 times. The door opened a crack. It wasn't Tyler. It was Amber. She was wearing a white t-shirt, phone in hand, looking as surprised as if she'd seen a delivery person at the wrong address. "Oh, weren't you supposed to be back later? Why can't I get in?" Mabel asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was as stiff as rotten wood about to crack. Amber glanced inside. A pause. Then she stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "Tyler was supposed to have told you." "About the house transfer." "Transfer what?" "The papers you signed the other day. Remember, at the dining table." "What did I sign?" "The transfer of ownership. It's all legal. It's just to make things easier to handle if something happens to you." "And what about me?" "Well now, you don't live here anymore." Mabel clutched the grocery bag. The rotisserie chicken was warm in her hands, but her own hand was as cold as metal. She said nothing more. Amber had already gone back inside, and this time the click of the new lock echoed like a final farewell. She didn't knock again. No one came out. No one looked through the window. She stepped off the porch like someone who had just buried the most precious thing in her life. No tears, only the wind blowing the hem of her coat and a dull ache in her chest, more painful than any needle stick she had ever felt as a nurse. At that moment, she didn't know where she would go. She only knew she no longer had a home to return to. And the greatest pain wasn't losing the house. It was realizing that the person she loved most saw her as an obstacle. Tyler hadn't just taken the home she had built. He had taken her dignity, her past, and the trust she once thought nothing could break. But there was one thing he never understood. Mabel Green wasn't just a mother. She was a woman who had walked through loss, who had walked through death, and who had survived a lifetime of no one calling her Mama. He didn't know that he had just awakened a person she thought was buried deep beneath the dust of time. A person who had learned to stand up without anyone's help. A woman who had been cast aside by life but had never allowed herself to fall. That night, Mabel Green did not cry. She didn't go to anyone's house, didn't call a neighbor, didn't tell her distant niece. She just sat silently in her old sedan, parked 2 blocks from her house, in the quiet darkness of a vacant lot with the hum of trucks on the distant highway. Her hands remained on the steering wheel in the 10 and 2 o'clock position, as if she were still driving, as if letting go would make everything plunge into an abyss. On the seat beside her, the rotisserie chicken had gone cold. Grease had soaked through the plastic bag, leaving a dark, damp stain on the faded felt seat. Mabel didn't touch it. Not hungry, not tired, just heavy. That pain was not like death. It was like a betrayal that seeped in slowly, into her blood, her heart, her every breath. It didn't hurt once and then stop. It was a lingering ache, as if her entire memory was being burned piece by piece. And then, the next morning, in a moment that was both instinctual and desperate, she drove to the bank. Not to ask for help, but to be sure, was there anything of hers that hadn't been stolen yet? The small bank branch was on a street corner where Mabel still kept an account, one no one else knew about. She opened her wallet, pulled out a faded bank card, and stood before the teller with an unwavering gaze. After a few keystrokes, the screen lit up, and all the numbers were still there. Because Tyler, the son she loved most, never knew that account existed. In 2020, 3 years after the death of her husband, Leroy Green, she had quietly sued the hospital. Leroy had died from a blood clot, a medical error the hospital tried to cover up. But Mabel had been a nurse. She was not blind to abnormal readings. She wasn't loud. She didn't demand compensation in front of people. She collected records. She documented every pain Leroy went through. She sent emails. She scheduled appointments with a lawyer. She fought silently. 2 years later, she won. A settlement of $9.5 million US. No one knew. Not the neighbors, not her relatives, and absolutely not Tyler. Mabel transferred the entire amount into a private fund under her maiden name, Mabel Carter. She divided it into multiple accounts, no investments, no shopping sprees. She didn't hide it out of fear. She hid it for the sake of peace, because she knew that some things, when seen, change the nature of people, and love was never meant to be priced. Now, as everything had been revealed, from Amber to the new lock, from the swapped papers to the cold gaze of the very son she had once cradled in her arms, that secret, for the first time, became hope. Not for revenge, but to save herself, to start over. But this time, she wasn't empty-handed. She had money. She had her memory. And above all, she had a will, something Tyler had never truly understood. That afternoon, she drove to a rundown motel near a gas station outside Savannah, paid in cash. didn't register with a card, didn't leave a phone number. The room was narrow, the old heater creaked, the bed sagged on one side, but at least the lock was hers. And the key was in her hand. She opened her purse and took out her old notebook. On the last page, she had written 3 years ago, when the verdict was announced. Don't let money make you speak louder. Let it help you be silent. Silent to listen, to see, and to choose the right moment to stand up. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Tyler thought he had thrown his mother out of her house, but he had no idea. He had just liberated a woman who knew how to survive without anyone's pity. On her second night in the motel room near the gas station, Mabel Green couldn't sleep. The creaking of the heater, the whine of container trucks on the highway, and above all, the sound of her own heart breaking like rubble after an earthquake. Not loud, but every piece cut deep inside. She took the old notebook from her purse, the one that had been with her for years from doctor's appointments, lists of Leroy's medications, to handwritten Bible verses and her mother's advice from childhood. Flipping to the last page, she stopped at a faded phone number with the name Doris, housing counseling, legal aid. She had called Doris 14 years ago when a tenant sued her baselessly over a broken pipe. Doris helped her win that case. She was the only one who didn't treat her as an old lady who doesn't know the law. Mabel dialed the number. It rang once, then twice. Then the line went dead. The number was no longer in service. She sighed. She stared at the hotel desk lamp, as if trying to pull a solution from it. Then suddenly, a name came to mind, Clarence C.J. Bell, Leroy's best friend from their youth, a retired community lawyer, the man who used to eat salt and pepper chicken on her porch every 4th of July. The man who had promised, "If you ever need me, just call. I'm still smarter than the kids at the courthouse." Mabel found the number in an old address book. As she pressed the call button, her hand trembled, not from fear, but because for the first time in years she had to open up and say, "I need help." The phone rang a 6th time before a hoarse male voice came on, "Calling at this hour, I hope it's God." Or trouble. Mabel smiled, a real smile. It might be both. "Evie, is that you?" "Yes, I need to talk, and I can't do it over the phone." The next morning, they met at a small diner by the highway, a place that served coffee in mugs as heavy as bricks and called everyone honey. CJ looked older. His hair was white, his beard patchy, but his eyes were still as sharp as a razor. He didn't ask if she had eaten. He offered no empty platitudes. He just looked her straight in the eye and said, "Tell me everything. Don't hide anything. Don't go easy. Tell it just as you'd tell it to yourself." And she told him. From the first hug she gave Tyler when he was 2, to the last time he called her Mama before robbing her of her home with a fraudulent signature. When she finished, CJ didn't say anything right away. He just leaned back in his seat, silent. Finally, he spoke. "He tricked you, but his mistake was thinking you'd grown weak." "I signed the transfer papers, CJ. my hand, my eyes. You signed because you were deceived. The law calls that signing under false and uninformed conditions, and if it involves exploiting trust, it could constitute civil fraud, maybe even criminal. Mabel looked down at her coffee cup. Her hand trembled slightly. I don't want to destroy him, CJ. I just want myself back. I want to look in the mirror and not see a fool. CJ placed his hand over hers, not to comfort, but to affirm. We're not going to destroy him. We're going to educate him, legally. They sat there for another 2 hours. They went through every page of memories. Mabel had recorded the date she signed the papers, Tyler's words, Amber's tone, even the smell of sweet potato pie in the kitchen that day. She had been a nurse. Taking notes was instinct, and now it was evidence. CJ said he would recommend a trustworthy lawyer, someone who knew how to sue without making a scene, someone who could help Mabel get her name back on the door she herself had once opened with love. And before leaving, Mabel said softly, something she had never shared with anyone. CJ, I have money, not a little. It's the settlement from Leroy's hospital lawsuit, $9.5 million. CJ almost dropped his coffee mug. Good heavens, you kept that quiet for a decade. I didn't want the money to change my love for him. I stayed quiet to hold on to the only sacred thing I had left. Evie. CJ squeezed her hand. You didn't change, but he did. And now, you have the right to protect that sacred thing with the law. As they were leaving the diner, CJ turned back and said one more thing. He thought you were broken, but I know you were just bending down to spring back up stronger. Mabel didn't reply. She just clutched the notebook in her hand, and for the first time since being thrown out of her home, she felt like she was coming back, not to demand, but to reclaim herself. There was no phone call beforehand, no text message, no appointment, just a late afternoon, as the sunlight slanted through the oak trees. Mabel drove straight to her old house, the nest she had once cherished brick by brick. The house looked too clean, as if it had just been staged for a sale. The hibiscus bush by the porch, the one she used to trim every morning, had been completely uprooted. In its place was a strange, rigid, cold cactus, just like the people living inside. She brought nothing with her but a small purse, her leather-bound notebook, and courage, something that had lain dormant in her for many years. She knocked once. Then she stood still, like a silent warning that today there would be no more avoidance. Tyler opened the door. He was wearing a hoodie from some gym. His hair was messy, and he held a protein shake. He looked at her and froze. No pretense of joy, no pretense of kindness, just a look mixed with surprise and annoyance. Mom, I mean, Mabel, what are you doing here? She didn't move. She just stood one step from the door. I didn't come to beg. I didn't come to demand. I came to talk. Tyler glanced over his shoulder, as if to check if Amber was home. Then he reluctantly stepped onto the porch, letting the door close behind him. A light breeze blew. Mabel began, her voice steady, not angry, just real. I raised you when no one else would hold you. I gave you a name, a roof, nights I sang you to sleep, and meals with your name written by hand. I taught you how to fold your clothes, how to spell, and how to hold your head high in this world without shame. And now you repay me with a signature and a lock. Tyler turned his face away, but she didn't stop. You think I signed because I was stupid? No, I signed because I trusted. I trusted in the thing that raised you. Not money, not blood, but trust. Tyler swallowed hard. His voice was softer. I didn't force you. You signed. Then don't call me Mum anymore. If the only thing I am is a name on a piece of paper, then I lost you a long time ago. They both stood in silence. On one side, a woman carrying memories, loss, and a pride that had been crushed and then pieced back together. On the other, a man in a baggy hoodie who thought he was in control, not knowing that he was the one who was truly empty. Mabel continued, this time as if placing the final knife on the table. I didn't come here to ask for anything. I just want you to know I am not as poor as you think. I have enough money to buy this house 10 times over. I have a lawyer. I have documents. And I have something you never learned, the calm of standing up after being betrayed. Tyler's eyes widened. For the first time, the color drained from his face. I didn't know. You had money. Exactly, because I don't use money to buy people's affection. I use it to hold on to myself. Are you going to sue me? No. I'm not suing, I am awakening. And if that hurts you, it's because your conscience isn't completely dead yet. Then she turned and walked away. No shouting, no crying. She just descended each step on the same feet that had carried the weight of a lifetime of motherhood. At that moment, Tyler said nothing. He just watched her go for the first time, seeing her not as the woman he had exploited, but as a person he would never dare to look down on again. 3 weeks later, the Chatham County Court officially processed the case. It was classified as a civil property transfer with signs of familial fraud, a long name for a simple act betrayal. Mabel didn't appear before the media, nor did she hire a lawyer in an expensive suit. She came to court in an old cream-colored sweater, light blue slacks, and a pair of worn, flat-soled shoes, looking no different than when she attended parent-teacher conferences at Tyler's school in the 6th grade. CJ sat beside her, holding a folder of documents like a sword he had spent a lifetime sharpening. Tyler was not present. Neither was Amber. No one represented them. Only a letter from the defendant's lawyer requesting a postponement because our client is in the process of relocating, with no address provided. The judge, a woman with silver hair and glasses as heavy as her patience, took less than 20 minutes to review the file. She asked only one question. Mrs. Green, during the signing of these documents, did anyone explain the specific contents of each one to you? No, Your Honor. My son just said, "Don't worry. It's just an administrative procedure to keep the house in the family." Is there any evidence to confirm this? Yes. She took out her leather-bound notebook and turned to the page with her notes from that day. Each line was a piece of dialogue. Every word, every gesture, every sign that a mother who was once a nurse had recorded out of survival instinct. CJ added the audio recording from the day she confronted Tyler. The judge nodded. Then came the ruling. The transfer agreement showed signs of deceit and informational coercion. All documents were nullified. The house, legally, belonged to Mrs. Mabel Green. No applause, no cheers. Just a long, deep sigh from Mabel, as if a heavy door, locked for years by silence, had finally been opened. But something else was confirmed in court that day. Tyler Green was no longer in Savannah. 2 weeks before the court summons, he had withdrawn all the money from his joint account with Amber, sold his shares in a small startup, and left the state. No address, no note, no apology. Amber returned to Dallas, alone, on social media. She changed her profile picture, deleting all the photos taken on the porch of the house where Mabel used to sweep leaves every morning. In a vague post, she wrote, "Sometimes the scariest thing isn't being left behind, but realizing you chose the wrong person to trust." Mabel didn't smile, nor did she shed a tear. She just quietly put her notebook away in her bag. Then she stood up and gave a slight bow to the judge. CJ whispered, "We won, Evie. You can go home." But she shook her head. "I don't live there anymore. The old house is now just 4 walls that have heard too many lies. I need a new place, a place without the sound of tiptoeing footsteps, without uprooted flowers, without suspicious eyes under my own roof." A week later, the house was officially put up for sale. The buyer was Mrs. Geneva Harris, a retired teacher from Lafayette. When she came to take possession of the house, she told the real estate agent, "I don't know why, but this house feels like it's been through a hurricane." Mabel left a handwritten note in a kitchen drawer. "If you hear footsteps late at night, don't be afraid. It's just the sound of a mother who walked through the storm and finally learned how to walk away." Mabel Green did not return to the old house, not because she couldn't, but because she no longer needed it to know who she was. After the trial, she withdrew the money from her private fund, the $9.5 million she had never touched. No investments, no big house, no round-the-world trip like people usually do after getting it all back. Instead, she went to a place no one would notice, Pascagoula, a small town in southern Georgia, a place with eucalyptus trees, 2-story wooden houses, and porches full of jasmine in the summer. There, she bought 3 small houses, not new, not fancy, but solid, with gardens, with porches, with kitchens big enough to cook a pot of soup for 5. She named them Leroy's Porch, because Leroy believed that if you don't have much, you should at least offer someone a porch to rest on. The program operated quietly, with no large signs, no media attention. It was just a place for elderly women who had been cast out by their own families, so they could start over, without having to apologize to anyone for being old. The first was Mrs. Alma, 74 years old, kicked out by her grandson because she no longer had the strength to babysit for 10 hours a day. The second was Darlene, who lived with her only daughter, But when she went to the hospital for a joint replacement, her daughter secretly sold the house. They came to Leroy's porch with wary eyes, but after a few weeks of eating sweet soup made with bone broth, Mabel had simmered all morning, and listening to her stories about Leroy, the husband who used to read love poems every Sunday night, they began to trust. To trust that there was still a place in this world for them, not as old people in need of help, but as human beings who deserved to be respected. Every Sunday, Mabel cooked for all 3 houses: fried fish, boiled green beans, cornbread with a perfectly crisp crust. They ate on the porch, talking, with no one asking, "Where's your husband?" or "Why don't you live with your children?" They only asked, "Do you feel like talking today, or should I go first?" And then they would talk about the times they were treated as a burden, about the distant looks from their own flesh and blood, about the nights they shivered not from the weather, but from the feeling of being abandoned. Mabel didn't say much. She just listened. Then at night, she would write down each story in her old leather notebook, the one that once held all her pain. Now, it had become a journal of rebirth, where every line was a woman who had just walked through the darkness. CJ still visited. He brought pastries and stacks of papers she couldn't be bothered to read. "I have to have you sign these. Evie, don't let state law bother you ever again. As long as you don't make me read things like asset institutional provisions, I'll sign anything." CJ laughed. "You know, if I were in the media, I'd make a show The Woman Who Turned Betrayal into a Haven." Mabel smiled faintly. "I'm just doing what my mother taught me when you're backed into a corner. Don't scream. Stand firm. Pray. And when the storm passes, plant seeds again from the beginning." Leroy's porch had no security cameras, but people said that whenever the wind blew, you could hear Mrs. Alma laughing as she told the story of her first time riding a motorcycle, or Darlene humming softly in the kitchen. As for Mabel, she sat on the porch, a cup of tea in her hand, a thin quilt over her lap, and occasionally she would glance up at the sky, not to ask for anything, but just to remind herself, holding your head up is the instinct of someone who has bowed down for a very long time, but never broke. That morning, the Pasigular sky was a pale, honey-like yellow. The wind carried the scent of jasmine from the neighboring porch to Leroy's porch, where Mabel was making tea for Mrs. Alma and preparing ginger soup for Darlene, whose shoulders were sore from planting tomatoes. Everything was normal. Everything was calm. Until Mabel checked the wooden mailbox at the end of the garden. She didn't receive much mail. All the bills were electronic. Nearly all her friends were retired and called instead of writing. But today, there was a white envelope in the mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Only shaky handwriting, Mabel Green. She stood still. Her hand didn't tremble, but her heart did. She went back inside, placed the letter on the dining table, sat down, and poured a cup of tea. She didn't rush to open it. No hurry. She had learned that old wounds shouldn't be picked at like a scar, but opened like a door to a gentle breeze. Finally, she picked it up and gently slit the edge of the envelope. Inside was a simple piece of paper. Not long, not an excuse. "Mum, I was wrong. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought I deserved more than I had. Maybe I never understood what you gave. I don't expect to be forgiven. I just want you to know. I see it now. I see it clearly. You didn't deserve to be treated like that. If you are living in peace, then I'm glad. Tyler. There was no date, no return address, just the last line. If you are living in peace, then I'm glad. Mabel read the letter twice, then she folded it, slowly. No tears fell. She walked into her small bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of the old wooden dresser, and took out the Bible she still read every night before bed. She turned to the last page, where she used to keep important papers, Leroy's wedding photo, and a note. Self-respect is the last thing we must not lose. She placed the letter inside, not as a memory, but as a reminder that some pain should not be forgotten, but it doesn't need to be relived. Some wounds don't scar over for us to forget, but to remember that we survived. She didn't write back. She didn't call. She didn't ask who sent it, because she knew forgiveness is not about absolving the wrongdoer. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself with your own hands. That evening, she sat on the porch again, a thin quilt over her knees, holding a hot cup of jasmine tea. The sunset stretched out like a whisper from God. You have done enough. Now live lightly. Mrs. Alma sat beside her, finishing a scarf for a new woman who had just moved in. Darlene was in the kitchen making cornbread, humming an old Aretha Franklin song as she cooked. As for Mabel, she sat quietly, saying nothing, but in her heart there was a peace like that of someone who has just left a battlefield and no longer carries anger, only lessons and compassion, like a flame that never goes out. A year had passed since the day Mabel Green left the house she once considered her only safe place in the world. But now, as she sat on the porch of Leroy's porch, where the evening sun streamed through the windowsill, where the jasmine tea was always warm, and where the aged laughter echoed like a hymn, she knew home isn't the place you were thrown out of. Home is the place you choose to forgive and rebuild with your own hands. Some loves will not return. Some people, even if you give them everything, will still turn their backs. But that doesn't make your love meaningless. On the contrary, it is the things you endure in silence, the things no one sees, no one honors, that make you strong in a way the world cannot measure. Tyler might not come back. He might live his whole life with that mistake in his memory. But Mabel, she did not live with regret, because she hadn't lost the most important things, her heart and her self-respect. Some losses cannot be recovered, but they can be turned into a support for others. The 3 houses in Pascagoula now had a new name added each month, a new woman, a new story, someone who had been left behind by their own blood, but was picked up by the love of a mother. Mabel once believed that if you love enough, you will never lose the one you love. But then she realized something even truer. You can love someone with your whole life, but that doesn't mean they won't leave you. To love is to give without strings. To forgive is to keep yourself without needing to forget. And when you are betrayed, when you lose your home, your name, your trust in the one you called son. Remember, you still have something no one can take away, your worth. And true worth isn't in who others think you are, but in daring to stand up, look in the mirror, and not see yourself as small. At the end of the day, Mabel would light a candle on the porch and set out an empty chair, a small ritual, not to wait for Tyler, but to remind herself no one is a failure when they still have enough love to give and enough self-respect not to beg anyone to stay. There are people we once loved with all our hearts, but they chose to leave as if they never belonged. And then we learn something. What holds us up is not a roof, but our dignity. We forgive not because they deserve it, but because we deserve to be at peace. And sometimes the greatest strength is when we silently stand up and rebuild our lives with a love that no longer needs to be acknowledged.